leveraged IoT to transform its products and business model. In the process, we will develop an understanding of the capabilities and competencies that a company needs to build when it transforms itself around such technologies. Before we dive into the details of the digital transformation, let's first we must examine the company that GE was in 2011, the time that it initiated the digital transformation. Since taking over the company in 2001, Immelt would effect several changes in the firm that were important preludes to this initiative. Before I comment on those, I'm going to ask you to select 3 important changes that Immelt effected between 2001 and 2011 that changed the character and function of GE. An important change that Immelt effected was to spin off all non-core businesses, including financial services, insurance, and build up traditional businesses, notably aircraft engines, oil and gas equipment, etc. In sectors where GE was not the dominant player, the firm effected this strategy through acquisitions. In brief, GE would become much more of an industrial equipment manufacturer in the decade following Immelt's stewardship of the company. The second thing that Immelt did was to shift from a product business model to a service business model. That is, while product sales dominated its revenue in the early years, customer service agreements contributed about 75% of industrial earnings by 2030. For a fixed price, GE would use its knowledge of its equipment to deliver performance guarantees as well as service levels across various areas: planned maintenance, unplanned maintenance, on-site troubleshooting, asset performance management, all of these to the client. This shift to a more service and customer-oriented company is also aligned with the fundamental reshaping of the marketing function to give it far more importance. Remember, Immelt brought in Beth Comstock as the company's first chief marketing officer in 20 years. Finally, we see evidence of a more technologically savvy company emerging under Immelt's stewardship. You see the case with GE Transportation. You see that in 2009, they released software that railroads used to calculate the weight and length of a train, topography, speed limits, and all other variables in order to avoid unnecessary braking, saving an average Class 1 US rail company $150 million in fuel savings. In other words, you see the development of a company that is comfortable with technology savvy even, that is comfortable with analytics, data-driven strategies, product innovation, and business solutions. These technological capabilities of the firm, keep in mind, only enhanced its service capabilities. In other words, we are seeing the emergence of a GE that is closer to the customer and the customer's business context than it was at the beginning of the decade. We are seeing a company that is more technology savvy and data driven than it was at the beginning of the decade. These firm capabilities underlie the shift in the company's business model from a product to a service. It is important to keep in mind that it is this company that initiated the IoT-driven digital transformation in 2011. Let's now examine different elements of that transformation. We will explore how GE's products, notably its industrial equipment, was transformed because of IoT. Before 2011, keep in mind the product was a bundle of physical or mechanical components. Post 2011, these physical machines were digitized to smart software-enabled machines that allowed them to sense and acquire data from their environment and transmit these data to other machines and processing units for decision making. For example, GE used to sell wind turbines in the past to windmill farms. Any data on the operational performance of these windmills were observed and documented outside of the machines, fed into enterprise systems, and integrated with other data for decision making related to the machines. Now, in the new regime, the windmills, because of embedded sensors, transmitters, storage, and other software, will acquire data from the environment on their own and communicate these data to other machines, data, and people in the organization for further synthesis, analytics, and decision making. Further, the windmill's controller could now be augmented with software that could receive remote information to adjust its performance dials, including speed, torque, and aerodynamics that maximized its performance. So clearly, IoT-enabled smart products allowed for real-time and predictive maintenance of GE's machines to eliminate any unplanned downtime. However, if this is the only shift that is being enabled through IoT, then the true vision of that technology is unrealized. Think back to the wind turbines on the windmill farm. Earlier too, GE was using data collected on the machine to write service contracts for minimal downtime or degradation. If digitization was merely enabling GE to extend or optimize the valuable life of the machine, then think about it, all GE would be able to do would be to write better service contracts for the windmills. You're restricting the potential value of the technology to the machine, then that's all you are accomplishing. In the world post-digitization, you've probably thought about this in your response. GE was telling the windmill farm, remember from the case study, they are telling the windmill farm that with my new windmills, I will generate for you cost savings or efficiency gains valued at several millions or billions of dollars, and I will count a portion of those savings as my revenue. How can GE do that if the only information that the windmill was transmitting was about its operational environment? How can it do that if the value of the technology is only restricted to real-time or predictive maintenance of the machine? How can it do that? It cannot. For GE to be able to contract on business outcomes, the windmill will need to communicate other critical information to GE, including weather conditions, operating environment of other windmills on the farm, prior performance and capabilities of the windmill farm, etc., etc. In other words, the windmill needs to not just be digitized, but also be able to connect with other things, other windmills, weather data, operational and performance systems of the client, all of these to enable GE to create value for its client. The greater the number of things it can connect with and talk to, the greater was the value of the windmill. You see the big transformation here. The big transformation here is that GE's product, its industrial equipment, has been transformed from a standalone product to a networked product. A product whose value increases with the number of other products it can connect to. Like the fax machine. The first fax machine sold was pretty much useless until the second fax machine came along. And with each additional fax machine that came along, the value of the existing machines and the willingness of the customer to pay for them would go up. GE had begun its journey into the digital economy with this networked product. The business model was now not a service delivered by GE alone, but rather a solution orchestrated by GE in partnership with other market forces and service and solution providers of the client. Let's examine how various parameters of GE's output were therefore altered in the digital economy. First, as we already discussed, the deliverable is no longer limited to a machine. It is not just about preventive maintenance of GE's equipment to keep it running optimally. Rather, it is about optimizing the assets and processes of the client's entire business to create value. The deliverable has just shifted from equipment or equipment service to business outcome. Second, the nature of engagement with the client has shifted from being a standardized service to an idiosyncratic business solution that is highly responsive to customer needs. A windmill is a windmill is a windmill, but an energy solution is not an energy solution is not an energy solution. In turn, the compensation, as we discussed earlier, is not a fixed price contract, but rather an outcome-based contract where sharing of the revenue or profit created for the client will accrue to GE with the potential for GE's margins to be higher if outcomes were achieved. Finally, the idiosyncratic nature of the business solution rendered it now necessary for GE to have significant knowledge of the customer's business model and access to the operating data of the customer. These needs were limited in the earlier regimes of product and service business models. Now that you have a sound understanding of how IoT has transformed GE's products and business model, we will now explore the accompanying transformation of the company in terms of its competencies, capabilities, and further evolutions of the business model. Given that the movement to outcomes-based solutions is an entirely new business or business model for GE, it would mean developing fundamentally new capabilities. The new sales model included new service offerings and a long-term and intimate relationship with each customer that reflected a deep understanding of their business model and intimacy with their financial operations. In turn, there was a need to develop new expertise and new talent. Reflect on these capabilities to answer the following question. What were the new capabilities that GE needed to develop to create value? Indeed, the first capability that GE needed to develop was strong technological capabilities and analytics prowess. The case talks to you about the many efforts of the company in this direction. Clearly, being an old line company made it difficult for GE to fill jobs that required technology and data science skills. They were in competition with much sexier employers like Google and Apple for the limited number of young workers and graduates capable of performing technology jobs and functions. In response, GE launched a very clever self-deprecating commercial that follows Owen, a fictional engineer, as he tries to explain his cool new job developing breakthrough code as a GE engineer to his befuddled friends and family who think that he's going to work on a train or live a life of manual labor. Check out 2 of the videos here. The campaign increased job applications to GE by 800%. They opened an office in the Valley, competing with digital entrepreneurs and giants for top-class technology talent. Notwithstanding their efforts and ability to attract top technology talent, the question remains, could they build in-house all the tech capabilities they needed to succeed with this new business model? The answer is no. That would be impossible. And this is true not just of technological capabilities, but the business model itself. Remember that their old business model focused on scale economies and maximizing production efficiencies. The new business model put network economies to work The more connected the company was, the greater was the value of its product. So now, a critical capability required of the company was to build an ecosystem of technology partners, suppliers, and distributors of related products that enhanced its product offering. And in the case study, you see plenty of evidence of the company building an ecosystem of partnerships with the IBMs and Accentures of the world to upgrade its tech infrastructure and complement its domain expertise to build data solutions. Remember, the joint venture with Accenture was about building data solutions for the airline sector. With startups like Quirky and Local Motion to design at scale innovative applications that leveraged the data it collected from its equipment. The startups would also help GE overcome its competency trap. The reference to a company getting better and better over time at what it does and less adaptive to new situations. In industries where it did not own a majority of the assets, GE would make acquisitions that either provided it access to the assets or access to data from the assets through complementary products and closely managed customer or service relationships. Part of this ecosystem and capability building exercise was also GE's relationship with the customer and the customer's suppliers. Remember, we said the company now needs to develop strong domain capabilities and customer relationship management capabilities to demonstrate value to the client, build trust with the client, so that the client would share data from its operating environment with GE. Here's a slide that outlines the key marketing capabilities that GE invested in and built in order to transition to this new business model. Were all of these efforts easy to replicate and build at scale? The answer is a resounding no. Therefore, are these capabilities a source of competitive advantage? The answer is a resounding yes. Are these capabilities being built in non-crisis conditions? Yes. Kudos to GE. Few companies initiate and sustain transformation proactively as they did. Perhaps the company recognized that if it does not make this move, other competitors may come in and provide analytics and services on GE's assets. The case does provide information on several possible competitors, including IBM, who already provide such offerings. Its hardware sales too had been declining over time and products were becoming commoditized. So it was incumbent on the company to look to other ways to generate revenue. Nevertheless, there was no urgent need for this transformation, and GE engaged in this transformation absent such a need. They did not want to be the incumbent who failed to recognize how technology was changing its markets, or be the incumbent who gave its market away to digital entrepreneurs and giants in the new economy. Let's explore the final pivot in GE's business model, its transition to a platform. We discussed how GE started to digitize its products and create business outcomes for various clients. At this point, let's talk about another problem facing the company. GE's various business units, the case talks to you about this, their various business units employed over 8,000 software professionals that helped generate several $billion in revenue and savings. However, there was no overarching strategy guiding their technical choices and commercial offerings. Each business unit and product market optimized technology choices to local conditions, resulting in significant heterogeneity in technical and commercial success. Therefore, as the scale and scope of the industrial internet opportunity grew across GE's businesses, it became amply evident that the company needed a degree of standardization and integration across the business units to develop and support software applications uniformly across these businesses and leverage knowledge and expertise as well across the businesses. And such a common platform would enable GE to develop common practices across all businesses in critical areas such as providing mobility, ensuring security and compliance, providing a seamless user experience, connecting GE's machines, and managing distributed computing and analytics all in the cloud. Roux involved all the business's technology architects in developing such a platform. His efforts were not funded directly by the businesses, but he persisted. And thus, Predix was born. Here's a quick introduction to the Predix platform. So you see that establishing Predix, a common software platform that worked across the entire enterprise, helped provide a common language across the company's range of businesses and a framework for connections amongst business units and across industries. Predix helped make developing new applications more efficient and enabled cross-industry innovation. Lessons learned in one industry could be applied to others rapidly, thereby enabling GE's Industrial Internet Initiative to scale at speed. You also see from the video GE's vision for the platform extended beyond the firm. Indeed, after the establishment of the Predix platform, GE began to deliberate business models for the platform. The company had two options in this regard, what I like to call the Google model and the Apple model. Apple's platform is relatively closed. The company makes money on hardware sold. In the case of Google, the model is more open and the company generates profits off the services and products used on the platform. Analogously, GE could restrict the platform to only its clients as a means of increasing the sale of its industrial equipment, or it could open up the platform to create a two-sided marketplace of industrial manufacturers and app developers and generate profits of those apps as well as other services on the platform. GE picked the Google option. Why is that? One of the reasons behind this choice is that the market for industrial equipment was getting rapidly commoditized, and the share of revenue and revenue backlogs going to equipment had precipitously declined over the last couple of decades. Therefore, it did not make sense for GE to tie the revenue from the platform, the Predix platform, to its equipment and use equipment sales as an upper bound for its platform sales. That's effectively what it would be doing if it linked revenue from the platform or rather limited revenue from the platform to its equipment. For this reason, GE decided to open up the platform to enable outside innovation, with data coming in from industrial equipment outside the company and independent developers building applications on top of GE's platform. So what are the new sources of revenue for GE with this model? Revenue from licensing the platform, that is revenue from platform as a service and microservices, commissions from app sales on the platform, and more data-based solutions to clients. And this is a big shift for the company, because note that in this model, GE is completely agnostic to the equipment that it sells. It is no longer seen as an industrial equipment manufacturer in this model. What is it seen as? It is a software company. It has made the shift from the industrial economy to the digital economy with an allied shift in capabilities and resources. Is such a digital transformation challenging? Yes. Your customers may not be ready for it. But GE worked on building the resources and capabilities that it needed to make this transition very, very effectively. Was this transformation difficult to replicate? Yes. Did it get most things right? Yes. But yet, Immelt in a recent HBR article remarks this. My legacy at GE will be a complicated one. In our core businesses, earnings have tripled during my tenure. Our $324 billion backlog is up more than $150 billion in the past decade. We have record high market share. Our financial performance has outpaced that of our peers over the past 5 years. We've paid more in dividends than during the previous 110 years of GE history combined. Nonetheless, our PE ratio has gone from 40 to 1 to 17 to 1 in the past decade. The stock price has underperformed. Thus it is with transformation. We must ask, is it thus with transformation? What Immelt is pointing to in his lament is this dissonance between the fundamentals of the firm and its market value. We've tripled our earnings, we've recorded highest market share, he says, but the market doesn't value it. I'm going to put up for you a similar dissonance in this comparison between BMW and Tesla. BMW has similar production and delivery levels for electric cars as Tesla, but is far more profitable in delivering those. Yet, the market values it similar to Tesla. Why is that the case? Here's an HBR article that we wrote 2 years ago that offers some insights into this issue. We looked at all public firms in the US and how the market values them during periods of technology shocks and their innovations after. What we found was very interesting. Remember, I mentioned that in every industry, you now see 3 classes of competitors. Incumbents, who are products of the industrial economy, digital startups, who are technology companies that operate in that particular sector alone, for example, Netflix in video distribution or Tesla in auto, and finally, tech giants, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, who skate different industry boundaries, such as pharmaceutical or auto, with ease. What we found in our research was that investors value tech startups and tech giants for their growth potential rather than for their current period profits. In contrast, investors expect current period profits from industry incumbents much more than they expect growth. In other words, the runway for digital transformation looks very different for these 2 classes of firms. As a result, tech startups and tech giants are not only more likely to invest in digital innovation, but also more likely to obtain higher market valuations for these innovations. In contrast, industry incumbents are not only less likely to invest in digital innovations, but also obtain significantly lower market valuations when they try to become digital leaders. These constraints imposed by investors are especially salient to digital transformation. Why? Because most transformation curves look like this. This is New York Times' transition from a mostly print business model, where the bulk of its revenue came from advertising, to an all-digital business model where bulk of its revenue comes from content. And you can see that there is a trough or temporary decline in profits that the firm needs to navigate before realizing value from the transformation. And as investors value incumbents for current period profits, they penalize the firm during the time it experiences this trough and strip it of costly capital required for transformation efforts. Remember, we talked in the very first session about how firms are held captive to their incumbent performance trajectories by customers. What this is pointing to you is captivity by another equally important stakeholder, investors. And this is an important learning. Transformation is not easy. As Keynes famously remarked, the difficulty lies not so much in developing new ideas as it does in escaping from old ones. And it's very easy to be held captive on your current path by your existing customers and your existing investors. In fact, that captivity is the most persistent and well-documented trend in business. Even now, you see several articles that articulate the problems with GE's digital business, the new CEO's plans to trim costs associated with transformation, and the analyst's scathing response to any missteps from the firm. How do you break free of this captivity? Depending on your risk appetite and capabilities, you experiment with new products, services, business models. You continually assess the data from these experiments to change course and inform your decisions about business model transformations. You drive new profit models through an autonomous business unit with independent sales channels and separate resource allocation processes. You do not be encumbered by your current resources, processes, and values. You bring in leaders from the relevant schools of experience to beat the competency trap. And like we mentioned, you need unwavering commitment from the CEO. GE did most of this. What it did not do nearly enough was communicate with stakeholders. Understandably, this is difficult to do in times of uncertainty and change, but it is also incredibly important to do to successfully change course. I hope you now have an understanding of emerging technologies like IoT and the possibilities they open up for new business models, new ways of creating and extracting value. Remember that without a business model, the technology is just a technology unto itself. It does not change your firm's competitive value in any substantive way. I also hope you have a sense of constraints to transformation, namely captivity by customers and investors, and how these can be overcome to effectively change course. I'm going to close with a set of questions that you need to ask when you embark on digital transformation. The first question pertains to scope. You will find yourself asking, what business am I in? We talked about how tech startups and giants, when they enter an industry, start to change the product. Auto manufacturers now find themselves in the business of mobility, as Google commoditizes cars with autonomous vehicles and Uber commoditizes cars by creating a platform for mobility. We also talked about how in the case of platforms, overlapping user bases lead tech companies to move into adjacent services with ease. Amazon is the #1 company for product search, not Google. And Amazon will be earning nearly $26 billion from advertising by the end of 2021. It isn't Google's business, not so much a few years ago, but very much today. Similarly, Adobe is now a marketing company, used to be a tech or software producer. What is your business? The second question pertains to business models. How do you make money? There are two considerations here. Remember that most digital disruptions have their origin in digitization. That is, in separation of information from a physical product. Money from banknotes, books from the paperback or hardcover, learning from classrooms, music from the CD, and so on. In such case, given the low marginal costs of producing information, the core product starts to get commoditized. And incumbent firms need to figure out what business they are in. The offline strategy is about creating services and experiences that cannot be commoditized or replicated online. When music gets commoditized, the music industry bets on live events. Best Buy monetizes suppliers by enabling showrooming or stores within stores. All of these are examples of shifts in how companies make money. The second point to keep in mind is that when tech companies enter an industry, they come in from a different point relative to incumbents. For example, pharma companies are product companies that are distant from the consumer. Their capabilities are in the R&D lab upstream. And their business model is a blockbuster business model. That is, they focus on creating drugs that on average work or are effective for a large market. In contrast, a company like Google comes in from the downstream value chain. Its strength is customer data, and if that company has to enter the pharma industry, it seeks to leverage that customer data to create personalized medicine, very different from the blockbuster model of pharma firms. The ability of Google to create an ecosystem around that product will determine its success. And hence in these industries, you see many non-traditional alliances, like Uber with Toyota, Novartis with Google. This is not like Novartis' partnership with the University of Pennsylvania. This is a non-traditional partnership where Novartis is learning about downstream customer centricity and Google is learning about upstream capabilities required to manufacture drugs. The ability of each firm to learn from each other about its respective business will determine who will be successful in the industry. The third question we will ask is, what is your ecosystem? In traditional industrial economy, suppliers, etc. were seen as depletive forces. But remember, in the case of platforms, these are accretive forces. And therefore, you will have to ask, who are you going to allow to innovate with you? You have to be participating in an ecosystem at worst and at best orchestrating one. And you have to decide who will be part of that ecosystem. The fourth question, what is your value chain? Channel conflicts could come into course as you move into the digital economy. Omni-channel strategies and the like will become very, very important as you redefine your value chain for the new digital economy. You will discover new ways of connecting with your customers, and you will ask, how must I connect with my customers now? Data-centric customer centricity, new ways of connecting, new devices, all of these will assume tremendous importance in the new digital economy. And finally, you will ask, how must I rebuild my organization? As you redesign your organization for the new digital economy, it's important for you to become an agile, nimble organization that experiments as much as your competitors. Remember, you're competing with companies that run several experiments on their platforms, on their business models to learn about customers and engage with customers in different ways. As you compete with them, you need to incorporate talent in-house in various technology fields that allows you to be such a nimble and agile organization. You need to be communicating with stakeholders. We talked about customers as well as investors who hold you captive on your incumbent trajectory. It's important that you navigate any dip in profitability as you make a digital transformation to communicate with these stakeholders. You have to redesign processes for internal and external innovation and complement all of this with changes in incentives, reward systems, and performance review systems. I hope at the end of this, you have an understanding of the capabilities, resources, and values that you need to build in order to undertake a transformation for the digital economy.